Liam writes, there seem to be 4 index positions on my Shimano 105-5800 front shifter, 1 for each chainring and another 2 for trim positions. Do I need to take extra steps to account for these trim positions when going through the process of setting up my front derailleur? Shimano's new 5800, 6800, and 9000 series front shifters do indeed have 4 positions: low, low trim, top trim, and top position. Having all these clicks and positions in a shifter can be a little intimidating and confusing, but when it comes to front derailleur setup, it's really not that much different than previous generation front derailleurs. When set up properly, you will be rewarded with effortless front shifting and a quiet drivetrain in any gear. Here's how I go about setting them up. First, make sure the derailleur cage is set 1 to 3 millimeters above and parallel to the outer chainring. You may have to loosen the cable fixing bolt to create enough slack to move the derailleur's position. Once that is set, tighten the derailleur fixing bolt down to 5 to 7 Newton meters. You can use a support bolt to fine-tune the angle if it's slightly off by using a 2 millimeter Allen wrench to butt the screw against the frame. Try to get the angle as close as possible without using the support bolt, as the bolt is only there to help keep the derailleur from flexing. Next, make sure the chain is in the small chainring and the largest cog in the rear. Now we can set the low limit. Turn the screw farthest inboard counterclockwise to move the cage inward or clockwise to move it outward. Set it so the inner cage plate has 0.5 millimeters of clearance between it and the chain. Release all cable tension from the shifter by clicking the small lever a few times to make sure it is in the low position. Anchor the cable by loosening the cable fixing bolt, pulling as much slack out of the cable as possible and tightening the fixing bolt, torquing it to 6 Newton meters. Now we'll tune for the top trim position, which requires the fine adjustment of a barrel adjuster. Either an inline adjuster or one that is mounted to the down tube as a housing stop is fine. This is where the tuning process differs from previous generation front derailleurs. In order to set proper cable tension, shift the chain into the outer chainring while leaving the rear derailleur in the largest cog. Once in the outer ring, put the shifter in the top trim position by clicking the small lever once. Now use the barrel adjuster to set the inner cage plate to 0.5 millimeters of clearance. Adding cable tension will move the inner plate closer to the chain, while taking it away will move the cage away from the chain. Once you've set the proper tension, we can then set the high or top limit. Shift the front derailleur back into the top position by moving the large lever on the shifter until you hear it lock into position. Then shift the rear derailleur into the smallest cog. Once again, Shimano calls for 0.5 millimeters of clearance, only this time it's between the outer cage and the chain. If the chain is rubbing on the outer cage plate, loosen the outer screw by turning it counterclockwise to allow the derailleur to travel further out. If there is too much of a gap or the chain is being shifted off the outer chainring, you'll need to move it closer by turning the top limit screw clockwise. Once that is set, you'll be good to go. There's no adjustment for the low trim position, so don't worry about that. You may have to do a little fine-tuning on the cable tension after a few rides to accommodate for cable stretch, especially if you're using new cables and housing. If that's the case, just go back to the top trim setting and readjust the cable tension to get the proper clearance once again. If you want your question asked on Ask a Mechanic presented by Art Cyclery, send your inquiry to webletters@competitorgroup.com.